shuttle flights that went off successfully, and so I think the public thought we were sort of over the danger period, and yet it was always lurking there. And here we had tragedy to match the triumph after triumph after triumph after triumph that we had experienced. And so I think because we'd gone so long without any other difficulties, why it hit people, and perhaps the children, hard, and it hits the families hard, and our hearts and our thoughts and our prayers go to those people who may be watching there in Houston tonight, back in their homes. We're glad they're back there, and our thoughts and our prayers are still with you, gang.
Well, thank you. Jim?
And that brings us to the question of who are these people who fly off into space in the name of adventure, danger, and the United States of America? Well, Dick Scobee, who died yesterday as commander of Space Shuttle Challenger, talked about that and other things in a 1984 interview with Kimberly Kraft of public station KUAT Tucson. There is an eerie irony to his description of how it feels to be blasted up towards space.
The thing that impressed me most was the ascent phase, because of all the fire and brimstone that goes on during that part of the launch. And the first stage, when the solid rocket motors are still attached, which is about the first 2 minutes of flight, is very eye-opening, because the whole stack just shakes and vibrates, and it's very metallic and clangy and banky and everything, and it feels like being on a rough railroad track on a runaway freight train or something. You can still function and you can still see your instruments and things like that, but it's very, very eye-opening.
What does it take, actually, in terms of character, intelligence, training, etc., to really become an astronaut?
What I can say is that there are probably thousands of people in the world that can do the same job that I do, that are equally qualified, and I just probably happen to be at the right place at the right time with the right credentials. And there are a lot of people that have the same credentials I do, some of them even better, that aren't in the program. So I'm very fortunate to be where I am, but that's life, and that's the way the world operates.
Correspondent Elizabeth Brackett spent the day in and around the Johnson Space Center at Houston talking to astronaut family members and others about what it takes to take off into space.
It was as hard to watch the faces of family members go from elation to horror as it was to watch the shuttle Challenger disappear into a white cloud of smoke. How does a family cope with such stress? For the families of many astronauts, particularly former fighter pilots, the possibilities of such a catastrophic death was understood but seldom discussed. Lou Cunningham, wife of former astronaut Walter Cunningham.
Living is a risk, and I think not the most risk you take, the more you enjoy life, but I think unless you do take some at some point, you know, it improves or you get more from it.
But Cunningham's husband was in only the third group of astronauts. She is not sure if the families of the astronauts today know the same kind of support she felt.
When we were there, yes, everybody knew each other, everybody knew where each other lived. I don't think that's the case now. I think there are so many, and they live in different sections. A lot of the wives work. There's not the same camaraderie that we had when we were in the program, and in some respects I think that's going to be more difficult on them.
The families of the shuttle mission astronauts arrived in Houston late last night, brought back home in 2 chartered NASA planes. Friends who waited to greet the planes comforted each other as the families were quickly driven to their homes in NASA vehicles. At the home of Shuttle Commander Francis Scobee, neighbors, friends, other astronauts gathered to help. Neighbors gathered next door to Shuttle astronaut Ellison Onizuka's home as well. Charles and Suzanne Bruckner had been invited by astronaut Onizuka to watch the launch at Cape Kennedy. They recalled Onizuka's wife, Lorna, telling them of NASA's disaster briefing.
She explained that the Black Book was a briefing that NASA held with the immediate family of the crew on where to go and what to do and what to expect if something happened. And Lorna says, it's something we have to go through, and we all joke about it. We have to joke about it.
Though Apollo 12 astronaut Alan Bean says when the worst does happen, even those in the business find it difficult to know what comfort to offer.
You don't really know what to say. I mean, you can't offer any platitudes about how they died for their country or anything. Some do, but I don't think that holds much water. So you're helpless, but at the same time you want the families to know that you feel for them and that you're available if there's just some way they could ask you to help, you would help.
Original astronaut Deke Slayton takes a tougher approach.
What would you say to the families of these astronauts? What is there to say?
Nothing. Press on, get on with the show. You can't fix it. Try to find out what happened and go fix it and go fly.
It is the Deke Slayton attitude that author Thomas Wolfe called the right stuff. Does that attitude help astronauts and their families cope?
And I think the right stuff is the ability to pay attention to the gauges and instruments and not listen to the beating of your own heart. And if you can do that, you can be trained. Some people have it naturally. Deke and Chuck Yeager are examples, and there are many other examples in the space program.
Did you?
I had a difficult time. I tended to go back and forth. I would concentrate a while and I would listen to my heart a while, and then I would say, quit doing that and concentrate on the gauges and do your job. But I would do that a little while, and I would say I was one of the more fearful astronauts.
Do you subscribe to the theory that there is something called the right stuff?
Well, I don't know what it is. I've never seen it defined. Everybody's going to die of something sooner or later, and you all got to face up to it. So, you know, this is just another way. So I get excited about it.
To Tom Wolfe, how do you define the right stuff in the simplest terms?
Well, it's a code of behavior, and also in a way a set of almost superstitious beliefs that pilots, particularly fighter pilots, arrive at through training. And it's the kind of training, the kind of attitude that enables pilots to deal with some very fearful odds. Navy did a study in the late 60s that showed that a Navy aviator flying for 20 years runs a 23% risk of dying in an accident. That didn't even include combat. He runs a 56% chance of having to eject and come down by parachute to save his life. Now, just try to translate those odds into any other sort of occupation. Perhaps policemen face something like that. But it obviously takes a very special training. And when the space program began, that was obviously needed. The backdrop of Alan Shepard's flight in the first week of May in 1961 was 3 exploding rockets. 2 of them happened in late April. They were actually tests of the Mercury Atlas system that would take Senator Glenn up into orbit later. But nevertheless, the idea that these rockets could explode was very much in everybody's mind. You needed someone, a person, in some way, a person of steel to fly these early missions. I think that one of the real setbacks for NASA today, as a result of what happened yesterday, is that this flight of Challenger was to be the real crossover from the era of the right stuff, in which people of steel would be required to go into space, to an era in which the general public, whether we're talking about corporations or citizens such as Krista McAuliffe, would now be a part of a program whose safety had been demonstrated, and in so many ways it has been demonstrated. But I think this, in what happened yesterday, could psychologically throw us back to the period in which you needed the Alan Shepards and the John Glenns just to get the job done.
Senator Glenn, we've been talking about you.
I heard that.
Yeah, yeah. How would you define, first of all, going back to what Alan Dean said and what Tom Wolfe just said about you early astronauts, what it takes to do this?
All of us in those early days had been test pilots. We had been working through that time period with some of the newest of the supersonic aircraft, attack and fighter aircraft at that time. And you learn in that type of business, and we'd all come mainly from fighter backgrounds of one type or another, and you learn to put of course you're afraid sometimes, but you learn to subjugate that to your job that should be done at that time.
Oh, but why? How are you able to subjugate those statistics that Tom Wolfe just gave, that your chances of this and your chances of that are really very, very high?
We never poured over the statistics that much, although there were a lot of people, as Tom wrote in the first few chapters of the book, back Pete Conrad, some of the fellows. I was at Patuxent River Naval Air Test Center about that same time. I think out of the 70 or so people that we had that were doing active test work, there were more pilots assigned, but those doing active test work, as I recall, I think we lost 13 in the 4 years that I was there. Now that's like combat losses almost.
Sure.
But you felt it was important, the work you were doing. You're proud of the work you're doing for the country. There was some of that. There was a personal pride in comparing how you reacted to things with your peers.
Is there a thrill to the danger? I mean, were you aware of, hey,
Sure.
this is dangerous and this is thrilling at the same time?
Sure, there's some of that to it, but I would take exception to what you had when you started this segment of the program where you said that men do this in the name of adventure. Adventure is part of it, not being the humdrum, not being just going to the 8 to 5 job. So there is that aspect to it, but it's far deeper than that. And you don't just do it for adventure. That'd be like playing Russian roulette. You do it for a higher purpose than that, and I think most people do. But as Deke said, you do it, it's your job. And you've built up, you've had the training, and so you're in the right spot, the right place, and you're proud to do that kind of a job.
Tom Wolfe, you agree as a generalization as what John Glenn said?
Yeah, I think that is becomes the very much the essence of it, that the risk is taken judging from the astronauts I've talked to, the risk has to be taken for a higher cause, something that is believed in, and in the early days of the space program, people unabashedly said this is done for reasons of patriotism. And that, I think, today in the military, and for that matter in the Corps of astronauts to this day, I'm sure, is the case. But again, I think that NASA really wanted to reach a period, and this was to begin with this flight, really to begin wholesale with this flight, in which that stuff, whatever you want to call it, whether it's professionalism or something more complicated, was no longer going to be necessary. And I think that this could be a psychological catastrophe. Whether it will or not, I don't know, but it could be.
Senator Garn, what do you think? You were also part of the cross. If Tom Wolfe's theory is right, you were obviously part of the crossover too, to send you and then Congressman Nelson into space.
Well, in a way, except that I was a Navy pilot and had a 30 years
But you were not a professional astronaut.
Experience. Not a professional astronaut, but neither are a lot of the mission specialists. We have MDs, physicists, all sorts of people that were a step beyond the John Glenns of this world. But there's another factor here that makes these people tick, what made me tick. They love to fly. You love to be in the air. My father was a pilot in World War I, and I wanted to be a pilot more than anything else, and it's still the thing I've enjoyed more than anything in my whole life, more than the Senate, to be a military pilot. And there's a lot of people that are motivated that way. You'd be amazed.
Not by the risk? Not by the risk?
Well, the risk, you are trained to evaluate and weigh the accomplishment against the risk, and you do that, and there is a certain amount of thrill of taking the risk. But these people are still very special.
But let's talk about you. Let's talk about you. You said that you told Robin that your 2.5-year-old child was very much afraid for you as her father when you went up with his shuttle. Were you not afraid as her father yourself?
No.
Not at all.
I was not afraid. You have some apprehension about 4.2 million pounds of fuel, but that's where you weigh the risk against your desire to go and the opportunity to accomplish something. But these people, whatever the right stuff is, and I don't know how to define it either, but we need to pay tribute to those current astronauts too, not just the 7 who died so tragically, but some people down there in Houston who are magnificent human beings who sacrificed to do this for their country. And there is some patriotism, and there is some duty, and what John was talking about of wanting to accomplish something at very low pay, at great sacrifice to their families. They are a special breed of people in this country.
Let me ask Dr. Vanaskie a question in Boston. Before yesterday, did the young people in Concord, New Hampshire, see what Krista McAuliffe was doing as dangerous?
I don't believe they completely understood the magnitude of the danger. Some of the comments earlier that in some ways we've become jaded to the regularity with which the shuttle flights were going up, that people tended to take it for granted.
So they didn't see her as taking a risk. She was on doing something exciting, etc., right?
Well, I think that some people understood, some children understood that there was a risk. She talked about that. She also talked about the fact that you don't you can't live life to its fullest without taking some calculated risks.
Okay. Well, thank you. Robin?
Let's talk about the future. With America's manned space effort now grounded indefinitely until the cause of the disaster is found, some voices are already suggesting it should be stopped in favor of unmanned missions. We look to the future now. We start with the comments of Shuttle Commander Scobee, who talked about the value and future of space exploration in that 1984 interview with Kimberly Craft of Tucson Public Station KUAT.
The Earth isn't really overpopulated, it's mismanaged as an entity, and it just looks that way from orbit, because you don't see all the people, you don't see the congregations of people in cities. You can see cities, but you don't relate to all the mass of humanity that's involved in that, so you're kind of omnipotent, if you will, on your view of the Earth. But it's obvious that, you know, some places in the Earth, on the Earth, like Africa, are suffering from severe droughts, and we can watch the shrinking. Each of our flights goes up, and you can watch the shrinking of the water resources in that area, and you can watch irrigation in other areas. So you can watch the Earth grow and evolve from orbit, which is one of the luxuries we haven't had from being earthbound. And so we do gain a lot of knowledge from each of our space flights as we go up, and we can progressively watch different parts of the Earth change.
Where do astronauts see themselves going in the future? To other planets, or is it more of just exploratory missions? Or do you see yourself going to Mars or something like that? I know that.
I don't see me going to Mars. The shuttle program, when it was put together, was really a three-tiered program. The shuttle was the truck, space station was the place that we originally would go to, and then we'll colonize planets. Well, at the time, the cost of that was not palatable to neither the public nor Congress. And so they backed off on the program, and they built the shuttle. And it's a very austere program when it first came out. And we suffered from that a little bit during our development phase, and that's why some of the program was late. And so we did get the shuttle. We've proved it's successful, and we're flying it. So that's our truck. And it's taking the place of a space station right now, but we are in the process of developing the space station. And I think once you see the space station develop and flying, which is in the 1990 to 1992 time frame, then the next thing is, okay, now we're going to have to go colonize somewhere. And I say have to because I think it's man's natural propensity to go explore. And you can send all the machines you want out preparatory to that, but I think you're still obligated to send the people to follow them up, and that's what's going to happen to us. We're sending machines already, and we're going to send people to follow them. I know there's a manned spaceflight people and there's non-manned spaceflight people, and I just happen to be one of the manned people, and I have very hard feelings about that, and I think that's the way we ought to be doing things.
To pick up on Commander Scobee's phrase, the cost palatable, I'd like to hear each of you say, starting with you, Tom Wolfe, how is yesterday's tragedy going to change the public's, and therefore the tax-paying public's attitude to the whole future of the space program? Is the cost going to remain palatable?
Well, those are very prescient, fateful words of Commander Scobee. He put his finger right on the problem that NASA is going to be facing from this moment forward. In the latter days of